Here's what's coming up in episode 192, Vincent Higginbotham.
Here's the thing about witchcraft. It's one idea of how to tap into this thing that we all have the ability to tap into. I'm also not a fan of sage for smoke cleansings because everyone's doing it. And I'm like, that doesn't resonate for me. I use oak a lot. If it works for me and it resonates to me and it's part of my energy where I live, it just makes sense to use it. I think that when people do take the time to expose their trauma, they help other people. And so the lives that you can touch can greatly assist in the healing aspect of coming to terms with your trauma.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the Seance.
Hi, friends. I have a really great and unique episode for you today, but it comes with a little warning that the book, How Witchcraft Saved My Life, written by my guest, Vincent Higginbotham, and some of our discussion dips into the potentially sensitive topics of abuse, addiction, and mental health. But it's a really good discussion and one of the best books that I've read in a long time. And please know that there are helpful resources in the show notes, as well as after the interview for those who may need them. Let's pour some tea. Author Vincent Higginbotham faced abuse, homelessness, illness, and abandonment. But from the depths of these personal tragedies, a practice emerged, focusing on developing the psychic senses, reading tarot, understanding the elements, and drawing in magic for positive change. This guidebook, How Witchcraft Saved My Life, Practical Advice for Transformative Magick, is written for anyone coping with the legacy of abuse, neglect, poverty, loneliness, prejudice, or addiction. How Witchcraft Saved My Life includes hands-on exercises and practices for spell work, tarot, intuition, and the 4 pillars of witchcraft: to keep silent, to dare, to will, and to know. The stories and lessons in this book will empower you to pull yourself out of the darkness and into the light. Vincent went to college at the Art Institute of Philadelphia, where he graduated with a degree in industrial design. He works with Hekate and Hermes in all things magic. Welcome to the Big Seance Parlor, Vincent.
Thank you for having me.
I've read a lot of books, and this is one of the best damn books that I have read, and I've still got, as you know, a third of it left to finish. I've been trying to process why I feel like it's such a great book, and I think it's that you're not pretending to be something that you're not, because you put your whole self out there in the book, and it reads very much like a memoir as each chapter goes on. And I really dig memoirs. I read a lot of those. So when you give advice, I think we trust you, and you seem to be just as, forgive me, you seem to be just as messed up as the rest of us. And you can still write a book.
Yeah.
So I think that might be why. I'd love to know how did this book come about for you?
Oh, all right. Like when I was 8 years old, I knew I was going to write books. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a lot of things when I was a child, but the one thing that always stayed throughout life was to be a writer. So a book was going to happen at some point. right? And I kept journals all my life and everything. And I love to read. I'm not as well read as a lot of people. When I was younger and living in like boys' homes and youth shelters, I had a lot of access to books because they take us to the library and stuff. So I devoured books during that time. And then prior to all of that, I was in trouble a lot. And the only thing I could do when I was like grounded or whatever, when I lived with my family, was to read. So I devoured books, and I was always really into fiction as a child. But I had much higher reading level than most kids my age. So I was like getting really into great words and stuff like that. And then I went through this whole span of my life where I was homeless. So, I mean, you don't really have access to books a lot in that situation. But I always had journals and kept writing. And I'd try to have a book that I was reading. Like I tried to get access to books at that time too. So books have always been a big part of my life, both writing and reading. And then I really got into memoir not long ago and just thought it was great. Like I love Augustin Burroughs. He's one of my favorite authors. And Chuck Palahniuk is as well. And Chuck Palahniuk not only does fiction, but he does write some memoir type stuff. And so I really like, these are the people that I've always looked up to. But then as a witch, there's all these authors that I look up to, and they're a lot more accessible, I think, than these. Augustin Burroughs is not accessible, right? And Chuck Palahniuk, he's not accessible. But when you reach out to like Jason Menke, he'll talk back to you. You know what I mean? Or like any of the pagan occult authors. And so I found myself, as I developed further into really identifying as a witch in my 30s and into now I'm 40, I started getting access to these authors who I was like, oh, I can do this. This is doable. And I'm watching them do it. And they're just humans. So there's no difference. And why am I putting so much stress on myself? And then I had this opportunity to do a pitch at a convention in Atlanta called Mystic South. And I got to pitch to Heather Green, who's my acquisitions editor of Llewellyn. She's also a writer. She has a book coming out too, which is really cool to have an editor who's got a book coming out. But I got to pitch it. And she was like, send me some writing samples, because I was a fool. Like I was stumbling over my own self, like as I pitched, because I had never done it before. So sent her writing samples, and she was like, you're a really great writer. Not sure about the story you're trying to pitch, because I wanted to pitch memoir, like just solid memoir. And that's not what Llewellyn publishes. And she was like, so we'd have to workshop that. And she was like, but this is what I see you trying to say. We had like all these discussions, and then how much of the book could be memoir and how much of it needed to be lessons really changed over that frame to where it was more lessons and less memoir. But, my acquisitions editor really helped me stay true to what I wanted to do and helped me find what I was trying to do, if that makes sense. Because as a child, the reason that I always knew I was meant to be a writer is because I was given a message. I don't know what that message is. I don't know like what my whole purpose is, right? My sole purpose. I don't know all of the intricacies of it, but I know that my sole purpose is to deliver a message or many messages, and that can only be done through multiple forms of communication, whether it's video, writing, whatever, right? And so coming into the point where I could get a book published, that message started becoming more and more clear. And it has a lot to do with esotericism and self-empowerment and understanding how to use magic, literally magic, because I tried doing the whole writing thing several times in my life, writing memoirs, writing fiction, and none of it ever worked out until I was writing about witchcraft. And then writing about witchcraft, it really flows. And so I'm like deep in my revisions on my second book and planning my third. And then, whatever comes after that comes. But I think it was just kind of born out of necessity.
Before we really dive in, because I have some questions about different parts of the book, but let's get it out there right now so that people understand you do not have a book of rules here. And you talk very clearly about how there are no rules and you can break rules. It's not a dogmatic type of thing you're talking about. So I loved that you had me questioning whether I am a witch. And you also had me wanting to straight up sign up to be a witch. You had me so excited about it. But, someone is a witch if they say they're a witch. And so can we talk about that general thing right there about the breaking the rules and who cares and who is this book for?
Yeah. So, I mean, for starters, this book is for everybody. because at the end of the day, I think one of the main points about this book is that through accessing magic as a witch, right, I was able to lead myself to this place of healing from trauma. And I think that everybody on the planet has trauma. It could be the death of a parent. It could be the death of an animal. I mean, it could be puberty. I always say that, like, puberty is traumatic. And it really is, especially if you're, divergent from what the masses deem as normal. And so for some people, that's all the trauma they need. And then other people, it's like disease later in life. But everybody exists in this world where at some point they have trauma. And I think that's part of the agreement that we make when we decide to be incarnated, because I think that part of the whole, spiritual aspect of the bigness of the universe is that being human requires that we have human experiences. And I don't think that your flesh and blood hurts because it's not supposed to. You know what I mean? Like when you cut yourself, you hurt. And that's this physical thing that you experience that your spirit would never know if you weren't this physical thing. So I think that it's important that we recognize that trauma is totally normal and it happens to everybody. And so the book is literally written for everybody in that regard. And in terms of who is a witch, I think that when I look at people who don't call themselves witches, but I see witchy tendencies or witchy aspects to them, I am then to myself, not to them, I'm not going to preach on you or push anything on you, but I'm like, you're a fucking witch. And I just think everyone has this. Here's the thing about witchcraft. It's one idea of how to tap into this thing that we all have the ability to tap into. And so in the Christian religion, it's called prayer. And it happens in, ecstatic singing at church, and the spirit rises above and out of everybody and commingles, and they're manifesting what they want through prayer and putting attention into it and doing things like being grateful and giving back and then working hard at it, right? All of these things are happening in every religion. It's not just Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, all of the Abrahamic religions. I think there's 27 big religions in the world. I don't know the exact number, but all of them are doing the same thing. And I term this as witchcraft because I'm not using, the Bible. I mean, witches can use the Bible. There's lots of Christian witches. It's just that I term it witchcraft because I understand what I'm doing is connecting energy, right? My energy to the energy of whatever I'm doing, whether it's working with acorns or speaking to my deity or, petting my dog and feeding my dogs. There's a magical aspect to that is connecting me to this energy of dog. And then if you think about it, you can tap into that energy of a dog to find something. Maybe you've lost something. You're like, if I were a dog and I could smell it out, and so tapping into that energy helps you kind of tap into finding whatever it is you're looking for. And so I think that witchcraft really at the end of the day is just understanding the energy interaction, and that when you're terming it as witchcraft, you're not putting dogma on it. You can incorporate your own dogma into it, but I don't think witchcraft necessarily has to have dogma. That said, there are lots of closed practices out there that I would have no right to even speak on because I don't know anything about it. I want to know about it because I want to be able to break those rules. Because that's the thing about witchcraft too, is that once you understand a rule, once you understand how something works and why something works, you can then develop your own workaround to break that. So I don't know voodoo, right? I don't know anything about voodoo. And I want to know about it because I think that there's probably a lot of things that they use in that practice that I might actually already be using for all I know, right? And so I work from my gut and my intuition leads me into doing what I do. And maybe I hear a word mirror box and I'm like, oh, this makes sense, a mirror box. So I think that comes from a whole tradition that may or may not be closed. But I've never fully researched a mirror box, but when I've made a mirror box, my intention of what a mirror box is and how it's used and everything went into the creation of that. So that would be kind of that breaking the rules thing, because maybe this is an initiated path, or maybe this is something that's not open to me, but that doesn't mean I can't use magic that correlates with that whole thought process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I really like what you had to say about understanding certain practices or elements of practices before appropriating
right.
something from another group that might be inappropriate? Like, not that you shouldn't use it, but understand it before you use it.
100%. I think that it is one thing to not know you're doing it, right? Like for instance, I'm talking about a mirror box. And like, I don't even know where that comes from. I've heard the term. I understand parts of it. But when I think about a mirror box, I have this whole run-on aspect of it that I don't know if it comes from another anything. It's just, it makes sense to me. And so for that reason, I use it, right? But then if I'm like, oh, I just found out about this voodoo practice, right? It is my responsibility to learn more about it if I want to access that. Right. So it's a little bit different from hearing a term and running with that term as you understand it, or being like, oh, in this religion, they use brick dust to protect their house. Well, I don't know why. So I can't just go grab that and be like, well, this religion does it, so I can, or practice, whatever. And that's the difference. But I really do believe that you should not appropriate without understanding it. At the end of the day, if a dream catcher works for you and you understand why it works and you've made it yourself and you've put your own energy into it, then it's not really appropriation when you're using it. You know what I mean? It's more like appreciation.
Do you have any local Karen witches who tell you you're not a witch or you're doing it wrong?
I mean,
surely you've had run-ins with them, right?
I mean, my sister likes to tell me that I'm not doing magic and practice correctly. So like, I wouldn't call her a Karen though. I mean, I just think that she has a different path than I do. And so I'll be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And she'll be like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, why can't I do this? Or I'll be like, well, this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it. And she's like, oh, well, I would do it this way. And like, she always has a different opinion because she's not on the same path as I am. Like, we don't work with the same energies at all. And that's fine. Like, I don't put a lot of stock in it when somebody tells me I can't do something. Because if I did that when I was a child, I would have never like grown to be a 40-year-old man who wrote a book and can sit here and have this conversation right now.
There you go. Word.
Word.
In your book, you talk about the source, which I read a lot of people talking about the source. And usually it's kind of lofty. And I don't tend to jive with a lot of esoteric things. And my listeners know that my brain is 50-50 as it pertains to believing in something or being skeptic about something. And I, at the exact same time, will hear about either some occult thing or something paranormal and totally want it to be believable and want to believe and want to find it, want to experience it. And the other half of my brain will parse me right off by saying, that's some BS. What are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? And so when I see some of these lofty things, I kind of have an eye roll at the same time that I'm interested in it. And that is so annoying. I hate it. But you say in the book, the source is neither light nor dark. It isn't good or bad. It doesn't fall somewhere on a scale because it is the scale, and it contains every energetic and physical entity in existence. This one thing is fragmented and multiplied an infinite number of times. Angels and demons, deities, guides, guardians, sound, dark matter, and stars, atoms, molecules, and diseases are all the source, and we humans are part of the source too. And I don't know why that was like a ding, ding, ding moment for me when I read it, but I circled it because I was like, oh, that is such a really good description of the source. And that helped me understand.
Yeah. Are you still on the 50-50 scale after you read that?
Maybe not about the source.
Cool.
I'm pretty stuck on that 50-50 thing my whole life. That's annoying.
Yeah. It's so funny. Like, you write a whole book and then you don't even, like, it's not like I read my book every day. Right. And so like hearing you read that to me, I'm like, I wrote that. And it's so funny because it's the source, like the source delivered that. You know what I mean? Like, when you read that, I'm like, those are my words. That sounds like me. But like, that came out of my head. And I know that has a lot to do with the fact that is literally the source speaking in such a way. Right. And so I think the source is everything because I guess I felt that way when I was young. And I always felt like Star Wars really helped me understand it more than anything else, because they called it the Force, right? But the Force was in everything, like good and bad and everything. And so I guess I just kind of developed my own gnosis on it as I grew up. But it was always like the nerd in me wants to be like, yeah, it was definitely Star Wars that started that for me as a child. But like, yeah, I do. I think the source, it's the vibration that holds everything together. Nothing would be physical if there wasn't a vibration. And everything from my dog to the table to my phone has molecules and atoms and a vibration that is holding them together. And it might be different for different things. And that's why they're harder or softer or whatever, right? But like that vibration is the source. And so that vibration also exists in diseases and light and dark and everything. And then because we're human and we have consciousness and we are part of the source, it is feasible to think that deities also have consciousness because they're part of the source. And it's a different kind of consciousness that we almost create, which becomes an egregore or, a haunted house or, all kinds of things.
Talk about the deity Hekate.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think, first off, I think a lot of people get hung up on the pronunciation of her name, but I think it's presented to you your way. So however you say it is how you're meant to say it. I think that the deity Hekate is just like any other deity. Like just because I work with Hekate doesn't mean that my magic is stronger than someone who works with like, say, the horned god or Satan or, anyone else, right? Like, I think that they're all part of the source and that they have their own entity, but it's because our consciousness came together for millennia and created this name and put this idea in it. So they're like, all right, Hekate is the goddess of the witches and she is a Titan and she rules the land, sea, and sky or the underworld. And she's like associated with dogs and snakes and sometimes owls. And there are some parts of her that can be attributed to other goddesses. And when you look at it, she probably existed long before written stuff about her. So she might be older than the Bible and just all this stuff, right? But really, it's just this like constant human consciousness that puts that energy back into her or any other god, right? And I think that that's part of the reason that sometimes they come into popularity. Because I didn't know this when I came into witchcraft and I identified Hekate as the deity I was going to work with, but I guess she's pretty popular. I found out afterward that wildly popular for a lot of people. I think that there's a reason for that because what she stands for, that consciousness that we've put into Hekate, kind of like bending proud necks and being angry and being the storm. And I just threw my earbud out of my ear.
You're that moved by Hekate.
I'm that excited. Just being the storm and the anger and all the hundreds of epithets that Hekate have are necessary right now in this like ever-changing climate of the world, right? Because there's a lot happening worldwide with things like not just like politically or socioeconomically, but the way that we're seeing each other is changing so much too, right? Like Hekate is this goddess of the marginalized people. And we're like using terms like my pronouns are on a regular basis now. And that's not something that happened before. And so I think that as we as a species or as a collective move into a new consciousness, the deities or the egregores or the energies that associate with those conscious kind of decisions or consciousness in general, I think that they come into popularity because that's kind of the feel of the world. You know what I mean? So that's me talking about Hekate.
like she's a popular girl.
She is popular right now.
In chapter 3 titled There Is No Wrong Way to Witch, which I've already talked about, I really liked kind of that statement. But you had a great section about the particulars of using smoke to cleanse or smudging, different plant options, and why you shouldn't just follow certain traditions because that's what you were told to do.
Right.
And this is one of the most common practices I hear about among the larger group of us that, I'll lovingly call weirdos. It feels like it's always the answer to everyone's problem. And, your house is haunted. Oh, smudge it. And this is what you need to use and sage it.
Yeah.
And everyone always has the right way to do it. So I think it might be good for everyone to hear what you had to say about that.
Well, first off, like smudging is a legitimate native practice. And when I say native, I mean like indigenous people have a very specific way of smudging. So I never call anything smudging because I'm not indigenous and I don't know anything about that. I'm also not a fan of sage for smoke cleansings because everyone's doing it. And I'm like, well, that doesn't resonate for me. There are times where I use sage as an herb in my spells, but it's like the sage that I can buy at the grocery store. So like it works for me and in the way that I want it to work. And I see its protection like properties, but I don't think that you need to grab Palo Santo or grab sage and go like burn it in your house to get things out because like it doesn't matter like what you're using. If you believe in the smoke cleansing that you're doing, right? So I use bay leaves a lot and I use dragon's blood a lot too, actually, because they both really resonate with me. I love everything about burning a bay leaf because they're like sparky and crispy and everything. But like when I burn bay leaf, I feel like that's doing everything for me. It's getting things out and calling things in, and it just works better. And so I think that because it resonates with me so well, that works better than anything I could go buy at a store, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you talked about local plants too that are just a part of you because of the fact that you've grown up there, and you had me ready to go walk down the hill in the woods behind my house and like just pick some random leaves and things and burning it to see, experiment with it. I love that.
That's the thing. Like on my land, we have a lot of oak trees. And so I use oak a lot because it is what exists in my space. And so it doesn't only have my energy in it, but it has the energy of my space. And oak trees live for a long time and they grow and they thrive, right? But they need a good environment to grow in. And who's to say that they do or don't have conscious opinions on what they want the land that they're growing on to experience, right? And so obviously a tree wants where it's living to be healthy and safe. So why not use that to like tap in? Or like mullein. I have mullein growing everywhere on my land. Like you can use this plant for all kinds of stuff. And I'm just like, oh, well, this is what's here for me, right? And so I learned how to use it. And maybe it doesn't even fit the correspondences that all these books list, right? But if it works for me and it resonates to me and it's part of my energy where I live, it just makes sense to use it.
I love it. I'm going to read another part of your book. And so it's juicy. You're going to love it.
Okay.
So one of the pillars of witchcraft is the pillar of silence. And after you answer this question, we can go into any of the pillars if you want to. But I really liked what you said at the beginning of your portion about the pillar of silence. You said, I find that to be silent holds great power. I talk a lot. I don't always listen. I speak out of turn, and I don't keep secrets well. For these reasons, I find myself practicing silence more often than anything else. The 4 pillars are like any other aspect of magic. They take a lot of work and daily effort. So, I mean, maybe you can talk about your practices and struggles with keeping silent. And, like I said, go on to any of the other pillars you want to talk about.
So with silence, like I say, I talk a lot and I can be really annoying and not even catch on to the fact that I'm being annoying. I don't catch the like social cues from other people. Maybe I have like an issue. I don't know. I think it's a gift because I can just keep going, But like when I'm trying to find self-empowerment and I can say, all right, well, like, let me pay attention to the feelings of another person right now and hold silence for them. That's a really big thing for me because I don't behave in that way. So I can find empowerment out of that and then I can practice it more and push it further. And I learned to shut the up and just hold space for someone, which really is very powerful. Because not only am I giving somebody my energy when I'm holding space for them and letting them speak and have their turn, but I'm also getting power from them. There's an exchange. It's an even exchange because they're then giving me that attention as they talk to me. And so a big reason why I have an issue with silence is because I like a lot of attention. And so I have to like talk to get it. It's classic middle child syndrome. And I'm an Aries and a Sagittarius. So it's just all fire. And like I have a lot going on. So being able to get that attention while holding silence instead is very gratifying in that way. And then I believe that the attention that I get increases my power as a witch, right? Like the energy that I receive, I can store like batteries and then put it out into new things, like transform it into whatever it is, the energy that I need to put out. So I think that that's a big reason why silence is so important to me. Also, I really enjoy the sound of silence because it's not really quiet. Like when you just shut up and you listen, there's so many things that are happening. And what kind of messages are coming through those things, right? Like the tick of a clock, when you get kind of hypnotized by just that tick of the clock and you're not moving, you're not doing anything. And then you almost start to have a clairaudient moment sometimes in these things. And I think that that's another reason why that pillar can be so helpful for people. That said, I don't think any pillar is more important than the other. They're pillars because they all do the same job, right? They all hold up the structure that is witchcraft. And so I think that having the ability to be daring and like believe, even though all of the evidence says that you shouldn't, is really powerful. And when you truly believe it, even though you're like told no, or that can't happen, or this isn't going to work, and you believe anyway, you choose to dare to keep trying, to keep going. There's so much power in that. And it's also empowering. Like all of these pillars are empowering, like the ability to will something, like your will, it's literally called willpower for a reason, right? Because like what you choose to do or not do is based on your will. And when you are making conscious decisions that are also based off of magical practice, you're able to then see where your power is going through your actions and will, and really kind of like create something for yourself. And finally knowing, I mean, like knowledge is power. Like that's all that you need to say about that. Like what you know is powerful. How can you break rules if you don't know? Right. And so like that whole pillar is imperative if you want to expand your understanding, but then also be able to use your magic to make real changes and potentially even break the rules if you choose to break them.
One of the biggest tells that I wasn't a practicing witch before I read your book was I didn't know about the 4 pillars of witchcraft. So that was cool. That was like a big...
So I believe that originally it came out of the Hermetic order and they called it the pyramid. And so this idea of to will, to know, to dare, and to will, to know, to dare, and to keep silence, I believe it came out of the Hermetic order. I might be wrong and people might hate me for saying that, but whatever. I'll live with it. But the reason why I term it pillars is because I understand why it was used in that way as a pyramid, but I see the pillars as you have all this foundational work, right? Like the whole first half of the book is all foundational. It's that concrete that you lay. And then the pillars are what is holding that structure of witchcraft up. This might be 2x4s in your house, where it could be the pylons in a parking garage, right? But they're holding up a structure. And then ultimately, the roof of that structure, I think, is gratitude. And so that's why I term it in these ways, because I don't think that any of it works individually.
Got it. I'm really excited because I received a question from my friend and listener, Lesley. And Lesley is very active in the Big Seance Parlor, our Facebook group of listeners. And she's also the co-host of the Living Dead Girls podcast that I know several of you listen to. And she sent me a question in text form. And I was like, girl, you just need to like record this and read it in your own voice, and then I'll play it. And she was like, shut up. Okay. So she sent it like 5 minutes before we connected. And I love that I'm going to be able to play it now. And this has potential to inspire a whole episode in itself. So, so Vincent,
right.
know that I have no time constraints if you don't. So you can go anywhere you need to with this question, but here is Lesley.
Hi, Vincent. My name is Lesley, and I live in Buffalo, New York. And first, I would just like to start off by saying thank you for being so forthcoming about your traumas. I know that is not easy, and I can only imagine the process that led up to that. But I have to commend you for discussing trauma-informed viewpoints and approaches to dealing with trauma in everyday life. I am a social worker and a witch who practices trauma-informed care and harm reduction. And so I have a great respect for you and for you speaking your truth. This is my question to you. It's kind of thick. So humans are generally taught to repress their trauma. This is something as a social worker, I just don't know what to do with some days. I do my best to try to make those safe spaces for people to talk, but I often find myself just in a gridlock with the rest of society about talking about trauma, considering it's viewed as negativity or things people don't want to hear about, etc. And so people, they repress things, which, as you know, only leads to much deeper problems later in life. A lot of really horrible physical and mental pain, deep isolation, as you've mentioned, and worse. So if you could give advice to anyone who is repressing their trauma because they feel they're supposed to, or maybe because they're afraid to say anything, as we have a terrible habit of doing that. We don't like inconveniencing people. Generally, that's how we're left feeling when we want to talk about things that are hurting us or our struggles or our needs. And this is where I insert my rant about toxic positivity and all of the harm it's done to people who would probably be doing so much better if they just had a safe place to talk about the darkness they struggle with and the shadow work they should be doing. What would your advice be to someone repressing the trauma? And maybe what would be your witchy spin on that? I'm really curious what you think or what you would say. And again, thank you for writing this book. It's vital and I commend you.
So that's a thick question for you.
Heck, yeah. What would I say to anyone repressing their trauma? I mean, I guess anybody repressing their trauma, what I would personally say first would be, I'm here when you're ready. Who am I to tell somebody not to repress their trauma, right? So my instinct is don't do it, right? That would be the first thing that I would want to say, but I know better because who am I to tell you when it's time for you to work on it? And so I think that the first thing I would say is there are people who want to hear about it. There are people who want to be there for you, even if you don't realize it. And they might not be the people that you think that they're going to be. But I think that until you face your trauma, until you start to deal with it, it's always going to be there. I think trauma is magic because it literally transforms us. All right, so butterflies go into a chrysalis and they literally become goo, right? And then they become a butterfly. And so how painful is it to become goo, right? And then suddenly you are this new thing and you die 3 days later. You're beautiful. And for 3 days, all you're meant to do is mate and then lay eggs and then die. And it's this wonderful thing. And then prior to that, you're just this little caterpillar inching along. And so I think that trauma is a lot like that in that when you go into your chrysalis, when you go inside yourself and become the goo and then rebuild yourself, hopefully you won't die 3 days later. But you really do get this opportunity to become this beautiful thing because it's informed by your trauma. I think that it's important to, at some point, whenever the person is ready, to begin to view their trauma as a lesson and not be a survivor or a victim, but be a student. I think that if we pay attention to the lessons that the trauma has taught us, then what we can become is so much greater than anything we fear about our traumas. Not only that, but how many people have experienced the trauma that you've experienced? And if you're able to stand up and say, hey, this is my trauma, the way that I did, or the way that several other people do, right? I'm not the only person who's ever done this. This is an original idea to like expose my trauma. But I think that when people do take the time to expose their trauma, they help other people. And so the lives that you can touch can greatly assist in the healing aspect of coming to terms with your trauma. From a witchy perspective, I think that, like I said, trauma is magic. Like everything that fuels me is to heal from my trauma. Whether it's like anger, I'm angry about something, and maybe my magic is going to be baleful rather, and like not so nice magic, right? But it's all fueled out of my understanding of trauma. Here's my boundary that I built because of the trauma I went through. Here's this person crossing that boundary. Here's how I'm going to cut them out of my life with like a freezer spell, or, I'm going to bury them in a grave, or, whatever. Like I might use less popular healing aspects to help myself heal also. And that's okay. Because so like Lesley said, we live in this environment or this world where people are like, everything is great. Like you look at Facebook and you're trying to keep up with the Joneses because they're always smiling in their pictures and they're always like at the beach and having a great time. And, everything's honky-dory in these photos. But like really, they hate being married to each other, or the kids are abused, or there's like rampant depression happening. We don't know. We don't know what's happening. And when people only show that side of themselves, it's isolating to anybody who is not experiencing that. And I think that normalizing the fact that that is not the norm would be really helpful to everyone. And if not me, then who is my whole opinion. Like when I used to work in HIV/AIDS advocacy, that was a really big statement that was said. I used to be a peer navigator, and it was kind of my job to go out and talk to other people living with HIV and like kind of help people learn how to advocate for themselves. And I did it all by showing them how I was doing it as a person living with HIV. And what I learned the most out of that is that once they saw me doing it, they wanted to do it too. Like they were like, oh, cool. Yeah, you're right. If not me, then who? And this is this constant statement that's kind of used in that field. If not me, then who? Because if I don't stand up and say, hey, this is not right, you can't give me these pills that are killing me, then who is going to stand up and say it? And if we all are doing it, then we all have this opportunity to fix the situation. So if we have this like toxic positivity that's going on and everyone's like, oh, everything's great, and here's my little like light magic spell for healing, but nobody's saying, yo, I put that bitch in the freezer because I don't want her interacting with me anymore. Like if people would say this more often and say, hey, it's okay to do this stuff that's not all light and love, then more people would be open to understanding it, and also understand that it is probably also light and love. It's just your own light and love. I love myself enough to set somebody in a boundary and make sure that they don't get to interact with me, because my trauma taught me that that's how I need to behave with the world. Otherwise, I'm going to let that trauma happen again. So the minute somebody is triggering for like, I don't know, toxic narcissism, let's say, right? I have a lot of that was in my childhood. I don't let that in my life. I don't speak to my parents. I don't like allow these things in. I won't allow somebody to gaslight me. When I feel as though I'm being gaslit, I say, yo, you're gaslighting me. And it gives me so much power. And it might not be the easiest moment, but at the end, when it goes through and I have been justified in my feelings, even if it wasn't accepted by the other person, when I can stand up and I can say, I stood up for myself, that gave me power. And at the end of the day, all any witch is really searching for is power to, control their environment, control their situation, control their own life. And so when you stand up and like learn to deal with your trauma, come to the point where you're ready to deal with your trauma, you are going to feel empowered. It does level you up. It's like a level up in a video game.
And I would only assume from reading, the first 2/3 of your book so far, that you would be a proponent of, seek therapy, y'all, and find a
absolutely.
therapist and, a mental health professional.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You write books and then you're like, man, I wish I had said this. And I think the main thing that I wish I had really said, a constant thread throughout is that witchcraft is not going to do all the work for you. And I know that I say that. I know that I say that you need to do the work, but I wish that I had said more about working on your own mental health from not a magical point of view, right? Because I have a therapist. I go through therapists all the time. And then you break up with them and then you find a new one because now you need a different kind of therapist, right? Or sometimes you're healed and your therapist ghosts you, which happened to me at the beginning of this year. So the problems that I was working on with her, I was good. And then I guess she just felt like she didn't need to talk to me anymore. So I never heard from her again. And this happens, but it was a 2-year relationship. So it's cool because I didn't need her, right? But when it's time, when I'm experiencing something else, I seek it out, right? Because first off, who doesn't want somebody to listen to them talk for an hour once a week or every day? I love that. It's great. But also it's really helpful to at least kind of be led into your healing moments. Also, my book definitely lists hotlines that you can seek help from, both at the beginning and the end, I believe, suicide prevention hotlines, LGBTQ plus hotlines. I definitely am sure that I include RAIN in that because I'm a big Tori Amos fan and have been since the beginning of time, it seems. Yeah, I think definitely seek help, but don't seek help until you're ready, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're not ready to seek help, it's not going to do anything for you. And then you're going to come out of it jaded. I can't tell somebody, go get a therapist if they're not ready to have a therapist, because what's that going to do? Nothing, nothing. If you don't understand the efficacy yet, then there's not going to be any. It's not going to be efficient if you're not ready to do the work too. So whenever, and if you're not ever ready, that's cool. That's, if that's how you need to do it, then that's how you need to do it. I think that's fair too.
That's a good point. That's a great point.
Yeah. Let's not tell people how to live their lives. Let's stay in our own lanes.
Totally. So my last question for you is actually is similar to Lesley's question. I first of all have to tell you that though I grew up, gay in those experiences, I also have some physical disabilities. Even though those things, I had the most perfect childhood, and I could not have been more supported and loved, and had it even going through high school, college, those things fairly smooth. And so I sometimes feel guilty about that. And I just want to know, when we see, or when listeners see a young Vincent today, someone who may be experiencing similar situations as you did, someone who is a teacher as I am, especially in that, horrible puberty, which is trauma, by the way, that time period of life, I know that, or battling life's many struggles. What can we do so that we don't continue to fail future Vincents out there?
Oh, I think the most important thing, so I have children and I try to follow this all the time with them. And it took me time because I'm a step parent, so I didn't understand it at first. But I think that what everyone's job is to, if you see somebody struggling, I think that you have to understand that not everyone is ready all the time. And it's important to let them know that when they're ready, you're there. If they're ready, you're there. That you might not understand it, but you will listen and seek to understand what they're going through and seek to help them figure it out if they want that help from you. And if they don't want that help, you have to accept that also. Because nobody, young Vincent could not have articulated what I can articulate now, right? That wasn't even Vincent back then, right? And so all of these things that I went through when I was going through them, I couldn't have talked about them I wouldn't have known how to explain that I want to kill myself all the time. You know what I mean? I wouldn't know how to help someone understand that I'm okay, but I have this like suicidal ideation that's going through my brain at every moment. And so if somebody had forced me to explain that, I couldn't have explained it correctly. And I think that that's really important too. Like, we have to let people come to their stuff when they're ready. And I think that the best way to not fail somebody in that situation is just to let them know that you're present and to offer your presence if they need it. And if they don't feel like you're the right person, offer to help them find the right person. And I mean, like, seek to help, but it's that whole idiom of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So like, lead them to the water and keep showing them the water's there. And when they're ready, they're going to drink. And if you've done it right, they'll probably drink from your hand, right? But like, they might not, but at least they're going to be aware that that one person was here. So maybe somebody else is, if that makes sense. And also, I probably don't have the right answer, because who does? Like, there's no absolute in that. There's no way to say this would definitely work for everybody, because what would have worked for me might not work for you. You know, I mean, I think it all really depends on the trauma too, because while we experience trauma, and trauma can be, it cannot be equated, it can't be compared, right? Like, your trauma and my trauma are equally as traumatic. And so I think that how we deal with that trauma, though, can differ greatly. And they might not appear equal in the way that we're dealing with it, even if they're the same trauma. So we can't expect to have the same outcome every time, I think. And yeah, I would just say, like, really the main thing is just to be there, to be present, to give them their space, but also to give them your attention if they want it. Does that make sense?
Yes. And thank you. If you're going to have children, be good people, y'all.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're going to work with children, be good people. And if you can't, then find somebody to step in so they can be the good people, is all I'm going to say. Although, I don't know. Like I said, I have no experience with that. And I just can't imagine. I cannot imagine the trauma. And I do see trauma sometimes.
Yeah.
And it just, it tears me up. I don't know how people.
You know, when I was in 7th grade and 8th and 9th grade, I experienced a lot of physical abuse at home. And a lot of people tried to help and nobody was able to. And it never stopped. It actually made it worse. So sometimes, like, you should listen to a person when they're like, that's not going to help. You know what I mean? Because I'd go home and like, there would suddenly be a caseworker there. And then, like, you know, the caseworker leaves and they're like, yeah, we can't do anything here. Well, thanks. Now I'm going to get my ass beat. Like, I appreciate it, but like, the bruises that you're going to cause me aren't going to, you know, be great. So sometimes it's about giving a person their space, especially in like situations like that, because at the end of the day, I mean, like, yeah, trauma is happening all the time. And I think that, like, I mean, I like to hope that my children do not experience a whole bunch of trauma at the expense of me, like at my expense, that I've caused them trauma. But I would also, I mean, like, I'm from the ghetto in Philadelphia. So I'm pretty sure if somebody else caused my child trauma, I'd probably end up in jail or something. Like, I wouldn't stand for it. So like, I would probably not be taking my own advice in that situation, but whatever. Like, that would probably just be my trauma-informed actions.
Let's stay out of jail. Okay.
I'm doing my best. So far, so good. So far, so good.
Well, Vincent, first of all, it's an honor to talk to you. And I love this energy that we've shared and the wisdom you've given us. But I want to give you a chance to give us any final thoughts that you have, anything else from the book that people might want, you know, where they should go, if there's a place to go.
Right. So I think the first and foremost thing that I want to say is that if you are in a situation that you can't control, whether it's abuse or trauma in some way, there is a way out. You are required to help find your way out, right? And there are people that will help you help yourself, but you have to seek it out. There's lots of hotlines. I mean, simple Google searches taught me that there are some hotlines that will even show up in your browser history as something else. So, like, there is an out. There is a way. When you're ready, it's there. You have to be ready. And some people aren't, and that's okay. If you're not ready, you don't deserve to be judged harshly for that either. You deserve to be judged not at all. Really, I don't think judging is very fair. So that said, I feel like we touched on everything important in the book. I mean, also, I don't like to give away too much information. That way somebody goes and buys the book and reads it, because that's important. If you want to buy the book, you can purchase it on Amazon. You can purchase it from Llewellyn directly, which is, I think, one of the best ways. But I think the number one way is to go to your local mom and pop witchy bookstores. And if they are carrying it, purchase it there. Support your local stores. If they're not carrying it, ask them to carry it, because they will. They can certainly order it, because it is available anywhere that books are sold. And then you can purchase it from them and help them make money. If you do purchase it, I would love it if you'd like say something about it on Amazon. You don't have to have bought the book in order to write a review on Amazon. Amazon reviews are very helpful for authors. They're one of the most helpful, because it helps get your book in front of other people. So that said, you can also join the book club that I am the director of on Witch with Books. I mean, we have a Facebook presence, but Witch with Books is very Instagram based. But what we have is a book club that you can join, where you read a book along with the club. We meet twice via Zoom. The second meeting is live Q&A with the author. And we're going to be doing my book in September. So if you want to read along with me and let me host the whole club, like, that would be fun. So maybe consider that. Also join the book club anyway, because it helps me, and it, like, I'm working toward, making that a real thing. You can find that at Witch with Books on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at Vincent_Higginbotham. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, so you can really follow me anywhere you want. I'll accept you if you give me a friend request. Might not have time to interact, but I always try. I really do. It's just I'm busy. I work a full-time job also, and then I have a family, and I'm writing another book. That's everything, I think.
Vincent, you are such a witch.
Yes, I try.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I really am thankful that you had me on your show today.
In the show notes for this episode, you'll find helpful information and resources for mental health, abuse, substance abuse, and addiction, particularly if you live in the United States. But here's a big one. For the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org or call 1-800-273-8255. For the crisis text line, text HOME to 741-741 for free 24/7 crisis counseling. For the National Domestic Violence Hotline, go to thehotline.org or call 800-799-SAFE. That's 800-799-7233. For the National Sexual Assault Hotline, go to RAINN.org, and that's RAINN.org, or call 800-656-HOPE. That's 800-656-4673. Thank you to the following super paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/Big Seance. Daryl, James Deacon, Genesis, Natalie, Kim Robb, Josiel Lorenzo, Susan Davey, and Amy Park Gedeke. My supporters at the Parlor guest level: who can be found at bigseance.com/parlor guests are Linda of shimmeringmoons.com, Anne Rekovich of ozparatech.com, Denise Sia of Raven Haunts Paranormal, Dina Siegert, Mitchell Coombs, Christine Ferrens, Mindy Kentop, Hope Battaglia, Cassie Keller, Melissa Armour, Diane Rax, Nettie, Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Bruce Williams, Christopher Kohler, Lana and John of Carbon Lilies, Jim Budd, David Rubenstein, and Norman and Linda Keller. That sound you just heard was the above and beyond there's not even a category for your level of support fireworks display. Because a sixth person has joined a special group of listeners who support the show at the $10 level. And that is Peggy Hagan. She's, of course, joining Glenna Becker, Steve Skinner, Kevin Gilbert, AJ Meredith, and James Wilfong. So thank you, Peggy, Glenna, Steve, Kevin, AJ, and James. And thank you, Paranerds. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. And you can continue the discussion and hang out with a great community of Paranerds by joining us in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. Want to hear your voice in a future episode? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.